So I've turned 6 claws now into 12 claws. Now this is more like the shape of the claws were before. Now the stone should sit back into, because I haven't changed the seating of the stone inside the ring. It's not a new ring I'm making, it's an existing ring, so the seating's still there, and somehow with your pusher or whatever you've got handy, just push 1/2 of that new claw over the stone and turn it around and do the other side, so it's evenly pushed down. You don't have the stone sitting at an angle. Put a little bit one side, turn it around, a little bit the other side, and eventually I've now got 2 stones in, and there's still some work to do on these claws, but we're almost there. If I'm having trouble just opening up those claws that I've cut, you can use any little tool you can get hold of just to divide them and then push them over. And they should sit right down into the existing seating. Using a little bit of beeswax there just to sit that stone properly. If you do have problems sitting the stone, get your burr, make sure it's the same size as the stone that you're sitting, because the claw material might be preventing you from sitting that stone, and just cut a new seating. It's the same size, so we won't have any problems there at all, and that should just sit in there. The end stones should be the best. They should all be well fitted, but make particular attention on the end stones. These are the ones that tend to fall out because they get knocked and they get worn against things, so make sure they're well seated in there. So these end claws I'm now pushing over the stone. I'm not touching the stone at all, I'm pushing the claw down to the stone. A little bit of one claw, then turn it around, a little bit of another claw, so it evenly pushes the stone into its seating. And once that's in there, those new claws should be nicely over the stones. So there we have it. Now we might have a bit too much claw material, so I'm going to file back and shape the claws, make them a little bit rounder, a little bit neater. This is where the job really needs time taken with it, because this is the finishing of the job, and this was what people won't see all the other work you've done, but they'll see this bit where you finish the claws. Make sure that they're not sticking up so they can catch your clothing, they're not skew width, and they're not bent, and they're all exactly the same, straight, with a nice appearance, nicely rounded, all looking the same. So take your time making sure that's the case. And there we have it. These two stones from the shoulder are rub over settings and they need to be replaced. So I'm having a good look at what exists, what's there before I start, because I have to try and remember what it looks like. You're not changing the ring at all, you're restoring the ring, putting it back to what it looks like. So we're getting rid of that old rub over where it's thin and it's worn over a period of time. We're filing away the thin and worn material back down, and we've got something to solder onto. So making sure it's a square, even surface. Preparation's important, and we're just removing the rubber. We're not touching the ring at all, not touching the shank or the existing setting there. Just getting a nice preparation there. So we need some chenille material, some tube, and then we can solder that on. We can leave the sapphire in. The sapphire will stand some heat. Even if it was CZ, it would stand some heat, but not quenching. You mustn't ever heat a stone and then quench it immediately. So I'm just using a graver there to cut a little seating. So I'm making sure that the stone has got somewhere to sit, and that the circumference of the chenille I'm using is going to take this stone. So a little bit of preparation here can save you a lot of work in the future. So each side is going to have these stones and a rub over setting. Now if you don't want to lose your stones and you don't want them lying around the bench, get a bit of plasticine, a little container there, and they will be safe in there. I've got a piece of tubing there, the right diameter, easily obtained from your supplier, and I'm going to leave it long so I can hold on to one end of it with my tweezers and solder it on. So that's soldered on there. Now we can cut off the excess. And we'll file it down to where we need it. Always leave a little bit more there, it's easier to file it down. And it should just be level with the existing stone. Maybe at a slight angle, because it's on the shoulder, we'll just angle it slightly away from the existing stone. It's a nice round appearance to the head of the ring. So I'm just testing to make sure my stone is going to sit in that new piece of chenille. Okay, we need to do the same on the other side. Now I'm using a little burr to give me a bit of a seating for this stone. Remembering just to do a little bit at a time, not too deep. If the burr isn't cutting very well, try a little bit of 3-in-1 oil, little burr oil there. It'll just help it to cut. That's a bit better now. That's it. Now offer the stone up. It should just be below the surface. And what I will do is I will file the outside of this rub over and give a nice square top, so when it does eventually get pushed over, it's even all the way around, and it'll be easier to push over if you just file a small angle at the top of the rub over, just so there's less material to push over and it's not so difficult. These are diamonds I'm putting in there, so they will also take heat if I need to solder the other side. And again, using my rub over, the pusher to get an even setting there. And the burnisher just to finish off, give a nice shiny finish with no push marks. That's one side. And make sure the other side matches. Same size stone, same size chenier. I'm just testing it with the beeswax there to make sure that it won't pull out. And I might even give it a little push from the other side. That's a good test to make sure that that stone is in there. Now we've got another project here, and that's to make a pendant bail or a loop. And we start off a little bit of flat material there, and I'm going to shape it, shape the edges. Again, if you find it a bit hot when you're filing, you can always hold it into a pair of pliers. Now make sure these are jewellery pliers. They're flat on the inside, so they haven't any ridges that can mark the metal. Parallel pliers are very good for this job. Now, with the Dijim gauge, I'm just checking the width there to make sure that it's at least one. This will be a good thickness to work with when we come to shape the pendant bail later. So we want to put it alongside our pendant. With this one the customer wanted a very large pendant loop, her decision. Usually you'd make it just about half the size of the pendant, but she had a big chain that she wanted this to go on, so we're going to take the lozenge shape and we're going to fold it over in a loop. I'm using a doming block and different holes or doming sizes there, and a doming punch. Get one to fit. Depending on the size of the material you're working with. So we put our lozenge shape material in there, and now we want to just dome it in the center, give it a nice shape. We could start off with a bigger part of the doming block and then work down, and we want a nice round loop. Okay, so once we've got it almost the shape we want it, we can use a pair of pliers and we can just bend it over. Now if it's nice and thick it won't crack. If you make it too thin then it'll just crack at this stage, so make sure, as I said, it's 1.5mm minimum. And there we have it, taking shape there. Nice simple pendant loop. Now we want to drill this. Take our rivet, which will go then through the jump ring of the pendant. Just offering it up there to make sure that it's going to look right. So there's the pendant with the top ring, and now I'm going to use a drill which is the same diameter as the 9-carat material there, which I will use for the rivet. It's always a good idea to hold this with pliers or something, because if the drill slips it can go into your finger and it does get quite hot while drilling. So we've drilled a hole and we want the hole to go right through both sides. Don't put it too near the edge because it'll wear out very quickly, so leave enough material to allow for wear and tear. Now we're ready for our rivet. Make sure that goes in there. You might have to just put a little point on the wire so that it goes through. If you're having trouble, rather than re-drill again, these are very handy for just making the hole a little bit bigger. They're called brochures, and if we put those into the existing hole and turn them, it'll just give us a slightly bigger hole. Now I've done that, I've put the rivet through the hole and make sure the pendant swings freely. As I said, normally this would be a smaller pendant loop. seems a bit big for the pendant, but this is what the customer asked for. We'll take off the excess there. Now, very carefully, making sure we don't use too much solder. We don't want it to run through the hole, down the rivet, and solder the whole lot together. So we just want to place a little bit of solder over that area there, and as soon as it starts to run, we stop soldering. It just wants to cover, that's it, and the same the other side, just covering the little bit of wire that's sticking out there. This does take a lot of practice, so before you do it on your precious jewellery, just practice this. And there it is again. So hopefully that solder hasn't run through the hole and down the wire, and it will solder the whole lot together. And let's have a look. No, it's fine. Now what I'll do is I'll put a little rubber wheel on, and we'll take off the solder and the little bit of wire that's sticking through, and we'll make it all flush on the outside and make it look nice. Again, if you find it too hot, always use a pair of pliers, but bearing in mind not to squeeze too hard to mark the metal. So I'm just putting it through a little chain there just to show you, and that's an 18 carat pendant loop. Now we've got a rivet gone here on the bangle, and it's a spring bangle. You can see the spring inside there. So before we do any soldering, the first thing to do is remove the spring, and remembering how it goes together, and we need a piece of chenille the same gauge or diameter as what was already there. We can replace all this chenille on this bangle. Having a good look, checking all round to make sure that it's in good condition. Any dents or anything, we can point those out to the customer. So there we have our piece of chenille. And to replace the two end ones, first of all we can check everything and make sure that we know what to expect. Now this is a chenille cutter. It's very handy if you want to cut equal pieces of chenille off. You can move that part forward and backwards, and you can fix it so you get the same size every time. And that little handle comes over there, and it just holds this chenille, because it's quite difficult to cut with holding it by your hand. It does snatch. So there's a bit there for the blade to just slide in, and the flat black piece at the end moves forward and backwards, as I said, to give you the length of your piece you need. Okay, so I'm going to leave it on the length of chenille for this job, make it easier to hold. I'm doing this freehand. This takes a bit of practice. So what I want is this solder to run. That's it. Now I can cut the excess off and do the same the other side. I haven't put it in the acid this time because it's a hollow bangle. I don't want the bangle to fill up with acid, so we want to use safety pickle if you can for hollow chains and bangles. So we can cut the chenille this time without the chenille cutter because we've got a bit to hold on to. That's worked out fine. I'm just going to file down the excess there and trim it off. Checking that it's square. It looks nice and flush. And then let's, even before we've removed the broken piece, we can leave it on there because it gives us our size. So it's best to replace one piece at a time, not file everything off and then you're left with a load of components to try to figure out. I've got the brochure again. I'm going to put this down the chenille that I've just soldered to line up with all the other bits of the hinge. By twisting that, it'll make the hole even on the inside for my rivet wire. I don't want to overdo it because I don't want to cut away too much material. Leave it nice and thick so it'll last a long time, that new piece of hinge material. So now we've got our piece of rivet right through there. Now all we need to do is replace the spring back in again, which I've done, and I'm testing it there to its limit because obviously that's what the customer will do, and making sure that spring works every time, because in real life that's what will happen to it. Now I'm going to just trim the excess of the chenille and the new rivet that I've put through there. Make sure that there's a little bit left. Don't want to take too much off because we've got to